Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today.
Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Today we have Kristin Ardis. That's how you pronounce it, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Her trilogy is Rules and Rebels trilogy. The first book is Smoke and Light. Did that just come out pretty recently?
Yeah, it just came out in March.
Okay.
So yeah, it's only been a few months that it's been out and about.
Well, congratulations, because I was looking at your website and it looks like the second book is close to release too.
Well, so the trilogy is already written. I'm just going through an editing. So I don't have a release date for book 2 just yet, but it's happening slowly
Right.
but surely. Like, it is coming. It's in edits right now.
Well, anybody that would be a fan of your book would be wanting to know that information.
Exactly. I'm like, it's coming. It's already written. And just getting the polish on.
Fine. Well, jump in and tell us about this world, the whole trilogy, where we start.
Yeah, so the trilogy is the Rulers and Rebels trilogy, and Smoke and Light is book 1. And so it's an upper young adult with new adult crossover. It's set in a world where magic and science meet, and these modern royals are facing off against rebels. And it's a romantic fantasy, but it has some of those dystopian vibes. So I like to tell people, think like Shadow and Bone and Shatter Me, and kind of merge them together. So a little bit of a genre blend in some ways. The world is going to remind people more of the dystopian side of things, because they have this magical forest and they harvest wood from the magical forest to make technological advancements. So it's a little bit more modern of a society than a lot of the romantic fantasy that you see, with epic fantasy and like medieval. It's not medieval by any means. They're a little more modern, a little more in that side of things, but it is very much a romantic fantasy, very relationally driven, character driven kind of a book.
Okay, and set up the characters for us.
Sure. Yeah, the main character's name is Kara, and Kara is the essentially the princess of this war-torn city kingdom, and she is recovering from a brutal rebel attack. So at the beginning of the book, you're seeing her desperate for her memories, and throughout the book, she's trying to figure out, how can I kind of reconcile myself into my life that I don't really remember. She has this fiance, a best friend, and she's, the future ruler of this kingdom, and trying to just find herself and find her place in that setting. And so she's desperate for these memories to come back. Meanwhile, she is having these dreams where there's kind of haunting her, and she feels they're leading her out beyond the city gates, but it's rebel territory out there, and it's forbidden to go beyond the gates for that reason. And so she really has to wrestle through what she's willing to risk to get those memories back. And then, as things develop, it's almost a be careful what you wish for kind of situation. Like, you can't pick and choose which memories come back, right? It's like you have to take the good and the bad. And so it's really just this really an identity story, and a very relationally driven story of who do you become when you don't remember who you are? What choices do you make for better or for worse when you don't have all of that perspective of what you've lived through? And she really goes through that over and over again in book 1, and then throughout the trilogy, as she's trying to help her kingdom and help herself, and just be the best version of herself that she can be.
So do we get to know why or how she lost these memories?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there is a rebel attack right before the book begins. She's about 3 months into her recovery at the time when the book starts. And so she knows some details of that, and then discovers more about what happened and why, and just all the different relational elements of how the rebels got to be where they are, and how she got to be where she is, and what decisions she made in the past, and what decisions other people made in the past, and how that all comes together into her present. And then, from there, it's like, oh, and now I get to decide what to do with my future, and really figuring out, like how do I be the best ruler I can be in this situation. So yeah, it's very mysterious, and you kind of go along with Kara. It's all from her point of view. It's a first person single point of view story. And so you're following along with her. And as she discovers more about herself and who she wants to be and is trying to figure out the best way to go about things, you're kind of right there with her. And then, of course, as a reader, you get to see, kind of piece together things maybe that she wouldn't, or not notice things that she does until she does. And it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed writing it, and I'm enjoying people when they're reading it telling me about their journey through it, of what they think she should be doing or not be doing, or saying or not saying, and all of these things. So it's a lot of fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah, I like those first person, when you get to go along with the character and discover as they do. And yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. What is the magic system like in this world?
Yeah, so they have elemental magic that kind of runs through bloodlines and skips generations and like bounces around. So you have some people who have elemental magic. There's in the world, they're called the Diamond Kingdoms. And so it's like a 5-city kingdom alliance, essentially, that makes up one peninsula. And they're kind of hemmed in by mountains on one side, and then the rest is peninsula. So they're fairly isolated to themselves. But their ancestors made this like alliance a long time ago, and they take it very, very seriously. And so Anlon is in the center, and that's where Smoke and Light takes place. And they're the kind of the heart of the Diamond Kingdoms. And so you have this world where they have access to this sacred forest that's magical, and has a grove. So they harvest magic from the forest, and that has led to some technological advancements. And then you also have the elemental magic that is also at play with some of those advancements as well, like using like hydropower for electricity, kind of a thing. And wind turbines, and they've kind of worked together over the years to figure out, like, okay, how can we work for the good of everyone? But that is still part of their magic. There's a family in Anlon who donated like their family's like lightning magic regularly as like a gift into their people, and that also helped with like electricity things. So that's the magic and science blend kind of comes from that. And then you have the other Diamond Kingdoms where each of them, the ruling families of those kingdoms, have ties to those elemental magics, and that's stuck throughout generations. And so you have the kingdom that's more geared toward water power, and then you've got wind and earth and fire.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then Anlon's kind of the melting pot, where they've got the electricity, the like lightning and light and different things. Then people have come there over time, in part because of the magical forest. And so they kind of have a mix of things, and you see that in all the cities, but more so again.
Okay. And how did you come up with this idea for the series?
I had the idea for the story over a decade ago, and I only knew the character who became Kara because at the time she didn't have a name or anything. I knew a decision that she made, and then I knew the relational fallout of that decision. With 2 characters, and I just knew the 3 of them, and I knew that, and it's kind of a pivotal part of the book, so I always have to be careful about like how I talk about it. But it was that seed of an idea for the longest time, and I tried to write it a couple different times over the years, and nothing was right. Like I would try to name the characters, and I just knew it was not right, and I could never get very far in the story. And so once I knew Kara's kind of inner journey and her character arc, I realized it's not 1 book, it's 3, and that helped a lot. And then it was like, this is Kara's journey in book 1, 2, and 3. And it was just like, oh, okay. And then I knew I'm going to write this, and I also knew I was going to publish it at that time. So it kind of stemmed from that. And then everything else kind of built around it. So it is a very character-driven book, a very relationally driven book. Which I think is kind of a hallmark of romantic fantasy, but it extends into like political relationships and societal relationships, and all of that is kind of wrapped up into this idea. And so the world kind of just stemmed from what the story needed. It's really funny because I do plan my books out. I am a plotter. I have outlines. My outline for Smoke and Light was like 19 pages long. They're very detailed, but at the same time, it doesn't always feel to me like I am making all these decisions of like, oh, and this would be cool to like throw in there. It's more like these are the characters, this is their story, and then the world just kind of naturally comes from that. Of this is obviously where this takes place, it just kind of builds, and I'm a little more intuitive in that way, I guess. So yeah, it just kind of stemmed from that. It was one moment in a story that I had hanging around for a really long time, and then it slowly progressed into that, and then got into the backstory of the characters. It was like, oh, that's why this person did that. And then it makes more sense, and then naturally just keeps building from there.
Right. Yeah, I like that. And a bunch of my stories are like that too. Like I'll come up with the idea for a character and then think about their background or their history, and then some of the other, and then I'm like, okay, where do I put this person?
Yeah.
How do they go on this journey, and who's with them on this journey?
Exactly.
What age group are we? So you said upper YA to new adult. So
Yes.
what age group is this appropriate for?
Well, I typically tell people I intend it to be like 15 and up, 15, 16 and up, but I have had people give it to their kids at 12, 13, and they said they were very happy to give it to, they read it first, and then they're like, oh, I am so excited to give this to my 13-year-old. And I was like, okay, great, So it is very much YA, but it does have that new adult crossover. Kara herself is 19, so she's at the very, very end of her teenage years. Some of the other characters are early 20s, and then you've got some that are a little younger and are teenagers in the upper YA, like 15, 16, 17, 18. So I wrote it intending to be on a YA shelf, but it has a little bit of emotional heaviness at times, just by the nature of what Kara's dealing with, where there's a lot of things with the memory loss and things coming back, and there's a war going on in the background. So it's a little, has some of that to it. So I usually say like 15, but your teenager the best, So yeah, I would say, as long as they're a teenager or older. I've had people of all ages above 21 reading it too, and mostly people like it. So
well, if you find your right fit reader, then they're probably going to read.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm one of those that still, I'm above the young adult years, and I still quite enjoy young adult books. So
yeah, I was surprised. Like my mother-in-law, I didn't think she would like. I wrote fae fantasy for the first time. It was like the least one I thought she would like, and she was like, "No, this is my favorite." And the character is 15, so I was like, "Okay, that surprised me."
Yeah, there's just something about young adult books. I really love them. I've always loved them since I was a young adult, and they just have a certain quality to them that I really enjoy. And as a writer, I really enjoy exploring identity themes, and I think that really fits into that coming of age young adult setting, and even new adult, because even as an 18 to 25-year-old, you're really figuring things out. You're in a new context a lot of times, whether you're going straight to the workforce, doing some kind of like hands-on training, or in college, whatever it is, getting engaged, all of these things. If that's your life path, there's all these different elements of change and really kind of figuring yourself out in new contexts. And that's a lot of what Kara's doing in the book. It's just in a fantasy setting, changing things up a little bit. So,
well, I think a lot of times it helps us explore all of those issues and changes in a way that feels a little safer sometimes, or feels like, oh, I can think about this in this world, and then maybe it can help me translate to my own world, but it's not as scary, or the price isn't as high.
It's like seeing a character kind of wrestle through, like, okay, this is who I am currently, this is who I was, or my understanding of who I was, or how other people perceived me, and this is what I want to be in the future. I have to decide that, and I can actually make those decisions, but at the same time also wrestling with like the choices you make, or are making, or have made, and all of that. And I think that's a very human experience for all ages, but especially when you're in those younger years of figuring that stuff out. I know I had some things in my my new adult years, I guess, where there was really tough, and being able to read it from someone like Kara, who's wrestling through maybe with bigger stakes than what you would have here with a kingdom and all these relationships and rebels outside the city, like just kind of prowling around in the forest, and you're like, well, how did we get here? But wrestling through those decisions and kind of regrets even sometimes. And what do you do with that? And how do you reconcile decisions you made when you forgot who you are, even if it was for a split second, a word that you say out of turn and you're like, oh, that's not who I am or who I want to be. But I said this thing, or I hurt someone in this way, or I did this thing. And then reconciling that with who you are at your core. And and just like being able to read through that from someone else's perspective and be like, oh, having that, I'm not alone in that, even if it's a very different situation, I think is really powerful. So I love books like that. And I love writing books like that.
Yeah, I could really see that, because really you said, well, the stakes are higher for this princess and the rebels, but when you're in something, I don't know why my video keeps doing that. When you're in something, it feels like that anyway, because
yes,
it's your
absolutely.
perspective of, oh my goodness, this is happening. I'm not sure how to get out of it. And it feels like that. It feels like, okay, it does feel like the world is ending sometimes,
Yeah.
or at least part of it, or something's broken and you don't know how to fix it, or you don't know how to
Exactly.
get to the other side. It can feel lonely. It can feel confusing. It can feel, who do I trust? Who do I go to? All of those things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know with the way that I wrote the book, I was able to there's a lot of, trauma recovery. She's recovering from a very intense physical thing that happened to her with that rebel attack, where it's like, oh, I had to have surgery, and then like now I'm recovering, and it's been slow, and it's been months, and I'm still like here, and has some lingering side effects physically from things. She has not quite migraines, but that's probably the closest like real world thing to call it, kind of episodes of things where she's not feeling her best. And I and also emotionally, all the emotional trauma that comes from that, and then things that happen throughout the book. And so being able to write trauma recovery and just her trauma responses and things, I really was able to draw from like my own experience with some of this stuff, with like physical recoveries, health wise, and lend some of my authenticity to it, and being able to like kind of, for me, like I read through and I don't go like, oh yes, this is exactly what happened to me, right? But I still see like those glimpses of myself and Kara, and I know that if you've been through something, that it's likely that you will also pick up on that and feel that connection, because like you were saying, you can feel very heavy, especially if it is a trauma, whether that's little t trauma or big T trauma, as they like to designate them.
I haven't heard that, but I will look it up.
Oh yeah, it's a whole thing, and I forget where the line is, but and it's not to like downplay anyone's trauma. It's usually like the little t traumas are, I think, used to let people know that things that happen to them that maybe they would brush off are actually traumas, instead of like looking at it like, oh, I don't have a big T trauma, so it's not a big deal. It's more like, no, like we're still using the same this is the same thing. It's still a trauma. What happened to you is still a trauma. So being able to read things, I think, where you see people wrestling with life and the things that have happened to them they had no control over, or things that happened to them that maybe they did make a decision, and there's some of that wrestling through of how much of this was my choice versus how much of this was out of my control. And I think all of those things, again, are very human and things that we just all wrestle with. And so getting to see someone else kind of work through it, I think, can be a really powerful thing. So
especially when you're younger, especially when you're a teenager and you haven't seen a lot of those experiences, or don't know someone in your world who's had that experience, and maybe you're feeling isolated, alone, and it can kind of help bring people, help them feel not so alone, maybe.
Yeah, and I would love that. If there's like one person who read Smoke and Light and like got that connection and was able to sit in that space and go like, I don't feel so alone in this feeling,
Right.
then yeah, I think that makes it all worth it for me. Like I love that.
And I'm so sorry. I have this going on with my video. I don't know if my connection is not good. It doesn't.
Your audio is coming through fine.
Okay, we'll go with the audio and not struggle. Oh, and so now it's a different camera. We'll go with this. There's my face and there's you. So what is your background? How did you decide to write? Were you in that world, or are you in totally a different world?
It's really interesting because I feel like this question is one where I didn't ever really decide to write. I feel like I was really always a storyteller, and I have books that I wrote when I was, just learning to write. So like 5, 6 years old, like illustrated. Harry the Hairy Monster is one, like I still have it. Just things like that. So I feel like that's always been there. And then I was writing novels in high school. I got started with NaNoWriMo really early. It wasn't right when it started, but it was a few years later. And I had a friend of mine, I think, who did it first. And I learned about it through her, like an internet friend, and then started doing it. And so I've just always really loved telling stories, and went through a period of time where I went to school for photography. So I actually have a degree of applied business in photography. And so that was like a shift. I shifted from like written word storytelling into visual storytelling, and did that for a while, focused on nonfiction writing for a while, and then kind of came to a space where I was like, I really want, I would try, I would do NaNoWriMo every now and then, which is National Novel Writing Month. So in November, I would try to write a novel in 30 days. That's what I would do every now and then. And during college, kind of pulled back on that a little bit, and then would do it and then kind of pull back, and it was kind of sporadic. And then I decided I really want to try just writing fiction again for myself. Like I just want to write for myself. No pressure on it, just having fun with fiction again. And I started that. And I did NaNoWriMo and just like kind of played around. And then the next year was like, oh, I'm just going to write a novel this year, and then I did. And then, then the next year was when it was actually a few months later that the whole arc for Kara for Smoke and Light kind of finally clicked and came to me. And I was like, oh, I'm going to write this. This will be my project this year for like writing a novel. And as soon as I knew that, it was like, oh yes, I'm back into this. And so it was never really like a conscious decision so much as it was, that's always the fiction writing, the fantasy writing has always been in me and part of my life. And it just kind of has ebbed and flowed as different seasons of my life have. So yeah, right now it's very much a big thing. I love doing it. Writing Smoke and Light was really a gift for me in a hard season of my life. So I was able to sit with it and, have a creative outlet while other things were going on in my life that were not so great, and so that there's just a lot of love for writing in general in me, but being able to have sat with this story was really powerful for me. So and I'm still working on the trilogy, like the books are written, but I'm editing, and then I have another series in the wind that is just like, please outline us. And I'm like, just wait your turn. Just wait your turn. I will come to you. So yeah, it's always been there, but it kind of shifted back around. And I think in part because this was the story that I knew needed to be told once I knew about it, but it's like, it was just waiting for that click,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like writing's always been that really good creative outlet for you. That's amazing that you found it so young.
I was always watching, I was a big reader as a kid. And so I was reading like Animorphs and Little House on the Prairie and all kinds of things as a kid. And then, Talking Animals, and I watched Disney movies. And so there was always like, my dad was a sci-fi fan, and he still is, but he would watch like X-Files and sci-fi things, and I would pick up on pieces of that. And then the fantasy is more of what I was naturally drawn to. And so, once we hit my teenage years, and then it was like the YA boom was around the same time, not quite. Twilight and Harry Potter were like a thing when I was still pretty young. And so it was like, okay, like there's a space for stories that I really enjoy. And they were kind of, like, oh, now there's vampires running around, like, great. And shapeshifters and all these things that I just naturally enjoy, and superhero stuff and all of that. So yeah.
Neat. Yeah. It's interesting because I started writing later in life, and I didn't have a good relationship with writing. High school or college. I didn't think I was good at it. I didn't like it. It wasn't something I was drawn to. So when I started writing, it was like, wow, like I like this and I want to do this. But yeah, I came from a scientific background and learned to write like technical writing and learn to enjoy that. And then that led me to fiction writing. So.
Oh, that's really cool though.
Yeah,
I love hearing how people find them, find their author, I don't know, mojo.
Mojo, that's a
how do you get
word.
there?
Their author magic, right?
Yeah, like what led to it? And I think that's great. I love seeing writing kind of just become a thing for people, because it is very different than my own experience, right? Like I just kind of always was doing that. But whenever I hear from people, like you're like, no, that wasn't me. I was doing this other thing, and then now all of a sudden I am writing these books, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I was definitely a huge reader, and I read a lot of fantasy, but I didn't write in the beginning. So well, and a little bit before we started recording, you were telling me about your wall behind you. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, hold on just one second. Okay. Yeah, so behind me I have essentially a book page wall that I put together. I had been staring at this corner in the room, and I usually do any, podcast, video calls, anything like that here. And it's near some windows and just a nice little corner, and it was just white wall. And I knew I wanted something fun on there. And so I started looking I would see people with book page walls and different things. And it's like, I wonder how they actually did that. And then I just found someone who was basically like, listen, you can do this like this way, where it involved like essentially like making your own wallpaper and actually adhering it to the wall. I'm not in a place where I can make anything semi-permanent like that in here. And so they were like, you could also just take painter's tape and book pages and like layer, and I was like, oh, okay. And so yeah, a friend of mine who is also an author, she gave me some like scratch and knit copies of her book. I needed them to test something, and she graciously gave me some, and then I had an extra copy, and she said, I'm gonna just use her book pages, and it's a book that I love. And so I just put them on, and yeah, I now have a book page wall. It just says painter's tape fixed to it, and then I put the book map from a proof copy of mine that was damaged on here too. So this is the Diamond Kingdoms here, and then the rest is a book I love by a dear friend of mine, and it just makes me very happy to have like book pages.
Yeah, it looks really cool. It's funny because I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I have that book that the cover was misprinted in the wrong color. I can just, that's
just very carefully, you just pull the pages out, and it's okay if it's not perfect. Like I have some with like this guy's got some edges there. But yeah, you just kind of start taping them down, and then you layer. I went across the top and did one row, and then did the columns one at a time, so they were layered a certain way. And yeah,
that's really good. I'm inspired, definitely.
And it's been a few months now, so it's still holding up. Every now and then I come back in with a little bit more painter's tape, and like we'll get a corner that's kind of started coming loose and like blows with the fan. But for the most part, it stayed.
Neat. Yeah. Well, tell us what's next for you. So Smoke and Light is the first book in the series, and then Ash and Light is coming next. Can you give us some hints about that?
Yeah, so it's hard. I didn't do myself any favors with the way that I wrote this book. So Smoke and Light has a lot of like things that you're figuring out with Kara along the way. So there's some things that I just like cannot say without, it's just greatly making your experience with Smoke and Light very different. So I usually don't say too much, but Ash and Light is a direct continuation of book one. So it stops, and then Ashen Light comes in, and then the third book comes directly after that. So it's one continuous story. It's got some of the same things. So you have this royalty versus rebels stuff going on. You have second chance romance still happening. It's a lot of what is in Spoken Light carries over. In that way, there's still like elemental magic, and you still got these, different kingdoms, and you kind of get to go from a more isolated setting in book one to kind of seeing more of how the world works and their interconnectivity as city kingdoms and how that works in book two. And it's just a lot of fun. Like I love sassy side characters. You still get to see sassy side characters in book two. Gage is in book one. He's a guard at the tower. So he's one of Kara's guards. And he is like a fan favorite, and he's in book two still. Like, he's got his moments, and it's a lot of fun to be working on it right now, because I'm, back with these characters, and you get to see them in a different way, because you're kind of past a certain point with Kara's stuff where she's made some decisions, she's kind of figured some stuff out, and she's like, okay, now I'm gonna do this ? And you get to see her still wrestling through a lot of stuff. So there's like trauma recovery still, and like this emotional, just emotional wrestling with some of the same things, but in a different way. And it's a really good, it's a solid sequel, I think. I really love it. It might be my favorite of the series. I'm not 100% sure, but I've read it several times, and I just get really emotional every time I read it, and I really love it. So it's going to be a lot of fun. If you like book one, you will enjoy book two. Yeah.
No spoilers on the fiance then, I guess.
Oh no, he's still around. He's still
okay.
There. We love our little. They're sitting on my shelf. I have character art right there. I'm like, hello. Yeah, no, like everything is still progressing, and all the relationships are still very much a thing, and they're still figuring everything out together. Everyone's still doing their very best with the circumstances they've been given. And it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. There's a lot of like loyalty and loss and love, and really just figuring all of that kind of stuff out when there's so much going on internally as well as externally. So you still see a lot of that as the series progresses. So yeah, and it is a trilogy. So there's 3 books there. And that's really what I'm going to be working on for the foreseeable future. And then once that series is done, I do have like a 4-book series. I think it might be 5, but I think it's 4. That is kind of a fairy tale inspired epic fantasy, romantic fantasy thing that I'm really excited to work on. And it is again like an identity exploration theme wise, but in a totally different way than like what Kara is going through. And so I'm like really excited to dive into that, but that will be later.
It sounds like you have
to go one thing at a time.
Right. It sounds like you have plenty to keep you busy. So.
More than enough.
And lots of books for us to love.
Yes, hopefully, they're very different, or they will be when the next series exists, but lots of fun, and still has the same kind of base to where like if you like one, then if you're open to something slightly different than Smoke and Light, then you'll be good.
Right. Yeah. When I like an author's voice, even if they're writing in different genres, I will tend to like all their work.
Oh yeah, same here. Like if I find someone that I like, I'm like, yeah, I will give your other thing a shot. Like it doesn't really bother me. And really I have the YA fantasy like layer as the foundation, and then most of my stuff I feel like will probably be at least somewhat romantic fantasy, as like a secondary foundation. And then the rest of it on top of that is kind of where I might be playing with the building blocks a little bit. But those foundational things are pretty much, that's just what I like and what I'm drawn to, and the stories that I think I have to tell. And so, it helps when there's that commonality in the foundational stuff, I think.
Right. Yeah. Someone picks up your book and knows to expect, a happily ever after and fun scenes. And
In mine, it's like, it's romantic fantasy and not fantasy romance, but I am a very happily ever after kind of person. So it's like, you might take you a while to get there, but by the end of the thing, like, we're going to end it on a hopeful note. It's going to be a happy ending. It's not that you won't cry throughout the book or the books, but that ending is going to be there. And I'm very much a hopeful stories kind of person. And that definitely is something that I guarantee with my books.
Fun. And does book 1 end on a cliffhanger at all, or do we get more of a wrap up?
No, it's more of a wrap up, I would say. I mean, it's not like everything, it's the first book of a trilogy, so not everything is wrapped up with a tidy bow. But it's not a cliffhanger. It's not anything where you're like, oh no, where's this next book? I need it now. It's more of like, oh, I want the next book now, but I also like have a complete story here.
Right. I have some feel good things, right?
Yes. And it ends on a happy-ish for now kind of a thing. Like, it's not a full on like, oh, we're all so happy, but we're in a better space than where we left it, and they go through all the climax stuff, and it's like, okay, we have a direction we're moving for the future, and we can go into book 2 now, and we can keep going and like do things and explore these other avenues of how to make things better for ourselves and everyone else. And so it's kind of one of those. So I would call it a complete book. It's its own thing, no cliffhanger. It is a happy ending, a hopeful ending might be the better way to describe it. There's still some stuff going on, but everyone is like, let's take a breath.
Let's celebrate what we have right now.
Right. It's like, so some things have just gone down, but you know what? We're gonna be okay.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I can't wait to pick it up. Tell everyone where we can find you and your books.
Yeah, so my books are available pretty much wherever books are sold. It's Amazon, Apple, Barnes and Noble, Google Play, Kobo, all those places. Your local library, you could request it. It is available for libraries. I love libraries, so nothing would make me happier than you requesting it there. And then you can find me at KristinArdisBooks.com. And I'm at Kristin Ardis Books on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, TikTok. I'm not on all those platforms very much, but Instagram is usually where you can find me. So that's the best if you want to like come say hi there, or Facebook I'll probably see fastest at. But yeah, I'm around on the internet. If you want to check out Smoking Light, KristinArdisBooks.com, there's a whole section about the book. You can read about it. You can find links to buy it at your preferred stores. There's a full content guide on there if you have any content warnings and things that you're aware of. I tried to put as many things in there as I could think of, just as like tags. So mindful, there will be spoilers in that document, but you can kind of go through it and look for this stuff. There's headings and things, so you can kind of scroll through and see like, oh, okay, that's what I was looking for. Yeah, and there's more about the characters in the world and all kinds of fun stuff over there. So KristinArdisBooks.com. And you can go explore.
Thank you so much. And there'll definitely be links in the description so people can find you that way. Thank you for being here,
Awesome.
Kristin.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
And we'll have you back when your second book comes out.
That would be awesome. I'd love to be able to talk more about it.
Fun. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.